Hello class, for today, what we're going to learn is basically all the components combined together into the trigonometric functions. We will involve all the a, b, c, d values combined. I know that we sometimes use this as theta and sometimes we use this as c, it doesn't matter. We talked about how a was the amplitude, the period, the new period is 2 pi over v, phase shift is c, and then vertical shift is d. Now, what you need to really understand here is, and tomorrow we'll go over this, is that this has to be in the format of b times x minus c, like that. If you ever get something where it says bx minus c, your phase shift is not c, because it's not in the parentheses form as this one. So if you were to factor out b out from here, and you put x, what goes here in this particular case would be c over b, because once I redistribute them back, I get minus c. That is the only possible way in which we'll be able to get the phase shift. The parentheses has to be by itself. Okay? So let's take a look at a couple of examples here and here. Now notice how both of these, I gave it to you, the period would be separated from the parentheses. Tomorrow we'll go over when it's not, but you just have to factor it out. That's really the main issue. Now the vertical shift will no longer be none, because we have finally involved the vertical shift into our functions. We'll have one sine graph and then one cosine graph as always. So let's take a look at how to do certain questions like these. So for this question, we have an amplitude of 3. For our frequency, we're going to say it's 3. The new period is 2 pi divided by 3, which is 2 pi divided by 3. I can't really simplify that. And that means that each increment will be 2 pi divided by 3 divided by 4, which is times 1 over 4. If you reduce it real quick, that becomes pi over 6 in total. So I'm going to make each increment to be pi over 6. Phase shift would be pi over 3 to the right, because it's minus. Vertical shift would be 1 up. So now I have every component out here possible. So now my job is still the same as yesterday. My first step is to establish my framework. My second step is to know where we start on the phase shift. And then third, you alternate max, mid, and min depending on which trig functions that were given. These 3 steps has to be checked before you say that you're pretty much done. Our first job is to always establish our framework, my top and bottom, and also my x value increments. So first, now the very first thing that we need to do is we need to establish our vertical shift being at positive 1. This is our midline. This right here becomes your midline, right? Then you go down 3, so 0, -1, -2. That's where my minimum is going to be. And 1, 2, 3 up, at that positive 4, that's where my maximum is going to be. So now I have the vertical framework. Now let's take a look at the x increments. Now we see the pi over 6, 2 pi over 6, 3 pi over 6, then 4 pi over 6. That right there is actually 2 pi over 3. So that means it's going to complete one cycle in that frame. 5 pi over 6, negative pi over 6, negative 2 pi over 6. You get the idea. Just establish your framework. Always, this is the must that you have to do. This is the must that you have to do. Next, I need to start on the phase shift. So to start on the phase shift, I will just use a different color here. I'll just use blue, I guess. The phase shift is pi over 3 units to the right. Well, if that's pi over 3 means same thing as saying 2 pi over 6, right? Because I don't really see a pi over 6 here. So 2 pi over 6 is pi over 3. So it means I'm going to start at this particular x coordinate. Now, it's sine. Sine means I start in the middle. So I start at the midpoint. I start at the mid on 2 pi over 6. So that is checked off. Then I want to be alternating amongst max, middle, and minimum. So how do we accomplish that? Well, since we're talking about negative sine, I know for a fact that once I start at mid, then it goes to min, and then it keeps on alternating back and forth. So the next x value, I'm going to go to minimum, middle, and then maximum. And then this, I am going to keep on doing it until I have this points, max, mid, and minimum. And then I'm going to connect the dots as so, and then there goes my graph. Okay? Nothing's changed here. We have done these 3 steps before. We have done all of these components before. The only thing that was new was vertical shift. That being involved is your very final step of how much harder it's going to be for trigonometric function graphing. Let's take a look at the cosine graph, and I would like you to try this on your own this time. Pause the video and play it again once you have the answers. The amplitude here is going to be 1/2. The frequency is going to be 1/4. New period is going to be 8 pi, and each increment would be 2 pi. If you're wondering why it's 8 pi, it's 2 pi divided by 1/4, which means I'm multiplying by 4 to the top, which makes it 8 pi. Divide by 4, I get 2 pi. Phase shift is pi to the right. Vertical shift is 2 up. First step, I want to establish my framework. So I'm going to go add 2 up. And this is going to be a little tricky, but it's 1/2. So which means my middle, my minimum, and my maximum will just be a little bit awkward because it's halfway from 2. So if the middle happened at 2, my highest would be 2.5, my lowest would be 1.5. Those would be the values of max and min. Then I'm going to establish my x values, each increment being 2 pi here. So 2 pi, 4 pi, 6 pi, 8 pi, and 10 pi. That doesn't change. And you would do the other way around as well. Now the framework has been established. What's going to be my next step? I am going to see where I'm going to start at, which is at the pi units to the right. This is a little bit of annoying because sometimes when this is same as the increment, then everything just comes out to be fine and dandy, but it's pi units to the right, which means it's going to be at one of these places where it's not really labeled. So I start at the phase shift, pi units to the right, and it's going to be positive cosine. So I'm going to start at the maximum when it's at pi. Then what's my next point? Where is my next point going to be? Well, you know that every increment, next point that's going to be is going to be at 3 pi here, because you need to move 2 pi units to the right. So what's going to happen here is that this point that happened at 3 pi is going to be at middle. And then the 2 pi that comes after that would be 5 pi, which would be down here. So when you guys keep on moving by 2 pi units to the right every single time, you will see that those 5 essential points will still be established starting at pi. Now the entire period from 9 pi to pi, if you do it, it becomes 8 pi. So it matches the same new period that we have figured out from before. So what we're going to do is we're going to start from pi, and then we're going to go all the way to 9 pi, and then we're going to connect the dots as so. But once we go in the opposite direction, we're going to be starting at negative pi, negative 3 pi, and then so on. So the points would still alternate, middle, minimum, middle, and then maximum, and then you're going to keep on alternating back and forth. So my full graph here would look like this. Okay, that's what it's going to look like. So even though the amplitude is 1/2, even though each increment doesn't match with the phase shift, you guys should still be able to establish the graph here without any much complications. Okay, this will be the graph for the answer. You will see very similar questions like this one and this one. You will see a similar questions like this one, the sign graph, where all the components is added, and all the components is added here for your homework questions. You'll do 2 of them today, and turn it in by 11:59 p.m. today. Thank you, and have a good day.